Hello, everyone. My name is Danny Nierenberg. I am president of a research and advocacy organization called Food Tank that focuses on stories of hope and success in food and agriculture systems. And that's why I'm so excited to be with you all because Slow Food International is such a story of hope and success. And the picture you're looking at was taken in 2009 with me and Eddie, and the first time I met him in Uganda. So, Eddie, I can't tell you how excited I am for you. Congratulations on being named Slow Food International's president. It makes me so happy. It warms my heart to see you, and I'm just so thrilled for you and the organization.
Thank you so much, Danny. I'm really happy to be here with you, to see you, to talk to you, and also to have this conversation together. It's been many years since we first met. So we've had this long working relationship since 2009 when you came to Uganda to also experience the work which I was doing there. So for me also, the stories you tell, the work you do is a very big inspiration also to me to continue the work that I'm doing.
Thank you. And I know storytelling is such an important part of the work that we both do. So let's start with your story. I feel like every superhero, which I consider you, has an origin story. And so in that picture, you're working with Project Disc, which is an organization you co-founded. Can you tell us about it and how that sort of evolved into your work with Slow Food?
Since I was a child, I was raised on a family of farmers. In a family of farmers, and I always went with my mom to the garden to grow crops. And then when I started going to school. The schools in my community, especially where I went, they were using farming as a punishment. And because I had this relationship with the garden, with the farm, I found this inappropriate. This practice of reserving a garden for punishing those who commit small offenses at the school. For me, it did not go well with me because I always wanted to go to the garden to do something. But it's a practice which was common, and I said maybe when I grow up, I have to change this. And when I came to the university in 2005 in Makerere University, around the year 2006, I came up with the idea of creating a project in schools that can transform the school gardens in my community from grounds of punishment to learning spaces, and also places where young people can enjoy to go to the garden and get connected to food and agriculture. This is when I founded developing innovations in school cultivation, Project DISC. And I worked with the community, with the schools in my community, 3 schools by then. And I shared the story, the success stories, but also it was it was not a very easy work to do because I was a student and I had to also to manage this project and spend a lot of time with the children to learn. But it has been a very successful journey. It has been a very successful project. And when I was invited by Slow Food to Terra Madre 2008 as a delegate because I was looking also for answers to the many questions I had about the agricultural system in Africa. And also I wanted to share my fight against the industrial system, but also share my education experiences. I searched for organizations which work in the same direction, and this is when I found out about Slow Food Foundation. I quickly received an email from Slow Food Foundation for Biodiversity inviting me to Terra Madre 2008, where I shared my story, where I shared my experience, because it's a safe space. Terra Madre is a safe space where people share experiences, share stories, share energy, inspiration. And I was super inspired by also the many educational ideas, the many actions and activities of communities. So sharing this story and also sharing my idea and my passion for education also inspired Slow Food to support me to create this network of leaders who are interested in changing the food system across the African continent. And the idea, which started as DISC, evolved into the Slow Food celebrated 10,000 Gardens in Africa project, which is now in more than 30 African countries, from just one community in Uganda, 3 gardens in Uganda, to now over 5,000 gardens on the African continent in more than 30 countries in Africa, training hundreds of thousands of women, children, youth, young and old people on the continent to manage their own food systems. And this would be very difficult without storytelling, and also without connections, and also without people coming together to connect dots.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the most instrumental things that you have done is make farming seem cool to young people, to make it seem as if they can and will make money off of it, that it can be something that can sustain their communities. And I think that's something that's been lost all over the world. This idea that agriculture, as you said before, shouldn't be a punishment, but it should be this opportunity, an intellectual opportunity, an economic opportunity, an opportunity to protect the environment and help solve the climate crisis. It really brings all of those things together and is a sense of empowerment. And I think, from your perspective, that's what you've really been able to do is empower folks, to bring them together to sort of combat these social and environmental issues collectively.
Yes, such small actions, small activities on the ground have a very big potential to impact on lives of people. In many places, young people are running away or shying away from the profession of farming. I'm a farmer myself, and I've grown crops since I was a child, and I'm still growing crops. And also combining this with my knowledge on agronomy, as I trained as an agronomist, inspires me a lot also to think about other young people there who would sometimes wish to go back to the land, but because farming as a profession has been abused in many different ways. Sometimes in the continent where I come from, farmers are associated with poverty, because the system has been designed to keep them poor, but also creating hope from small actions, small activities, and telling these impactful stories to the world inspire a lot more people.
Sure.
So that is why I'm really happy with the progress of the work we have done. Also, we have done together with you, Danny, telling the story of a less known project that also featured in the innovations that have the potential to feed the world in the State of the World report. So it's also partly because of this connection and also the communication of these small, impactful projects. Sometimes there are so many small actions out there, very impactful, but the world cannot know about them because they are lying out there. They can create motivation and impact on many lives, but the mainstream media or the mainstream communication channels, they are not looking at these impactful small actions. So that's why it's important to create linkages and communication systems that can show these impactful actions, and that can accelerate action even beyond the areas of founding.
Absolutely. Eddie, I have to tell you that it's been one of the biggest honors of my life to know you, honestly, to watch how you have grown in this space and to be able to be a small part. It's making me emotional to be a small part of the storytelling that is making such change. You have done such an incredible job, and to even just from the outside, to be able to watch that has been honestly one of the highlights of my career so far. So I really appreciate everything that you've done, and it makes me so happy and so inspired by you. But I want to go back, and I'm sorry. I want to go back to the obstacles that young people face in becoming farmers and becoming part of our food and agriculture systems. And it's pretty much the same all over the world. You know, farmers in the United States have problems getting access to land. Young farmers in sub-Saharan Africa face problems getting access to land. They face financial and banking obstacles because they can't get credit or loans. How are you sort of thinking about these issues as you move forward in this position so that we can overcome these challenges that young food system advocates face?
Access to land and other food producing resources or resources involved in food production and agriculture has always been at the forefront of my fight and also on the fight of slow food. That is why when we started to amplify and also accelerate and scale out this idea of the slow food gardens in Africa, one of the first goals was to build the social cohesion and resistance to one of the biggest problems for smallholder farmers on the African continent and also for young people on the African continent, land grabbing. So this is also why we launched the campaign against land grabbing, to support the communities have a voice in how land laws, land policies are drafted, and also to expose those people who are actually companies and corporations which are taking away land from the African communities. Access to land remains one of the major problems driving young people away from agriculture, because it costs a lot to invest in land, but also in many cases it's so difficult for young people to go and access the big sums of money that is required to invest in the land. But also when we come to the social factors, also back to our own profession as farmers, the system has been designed to make farming look like an activity which is not very attractive to young people. There are many young people in the communities, in the rural countryside, who actually inherit big tracts of land, and they could use this land, but also the mere education system is created to make young people feel like good jobs are in the cities. So we find also many young people being forced because of lack of other opportunities in the countryside. We see young people being forced or asked to sell the land to buy motorbikes to go to the cities. In Uganda, we call them border borders, because it's also intentional to draw young people from the countryside such that large-scale agricultural investments can get land. Also, when you look at the policies we have, they don't make it favorable for young people to use the land that is available in the communities.
Well, I'm glad you brought up this issue of land grabs. Recent research from the Oakland Institute has found that, international investors, because of the food crisis that happened, shortly before you and I met, really have targeted sub-Saharan Africa as the primary destination for large-scale agricultural activities and investment. And you mentioned policy. Why have African governments allowed these large-scale land grabs?
Talking about policy, sometimes African governments allow large-scale land grabs in response to the bilateral agreements of the international financial institutions, where the African governments want to offset the balance of payments and to improve their scores in the global rankings in terms of the poverty reduction levels. They are encouraged to allow direct foreign investments by the financial institutions which extend loans to these countries. by other countries which actually give aid to these countries. So there is a notion, or there is a saying, that one of the ways to improve the income status in a country, the countries need to stop dependence on small-scale agriculture. And we see it in Vision 2040 of a country like Uganda, where the vision is to reduce the number of small-scale farms in the country. But this comes directly in response to what international financial institutions like World Bank, IMF ask of these poor countries in Africa.
Sure.
to allow direct foreign investments, especially in the productive sectors like mining, agriculture, fisheries, and industry. This forces the countries to change the land laws and also the land use policies to eliminate small farms, to eliminate the work of small indigenous farmers, and allocate this land to the large-scale investments. In some places, the land that is grabbed may look like an area which is not useful to the community, but this area is the source of livelihoods. For example, the grazing lands for the pastoral communities may look like an underutilized area, because also countries have come to classify land in the countryside as underutilized, unutilized, or less utilized, or even like well utilized. And when you look at all these classification of land use, the traditional systems which are feeding people are normally classified as underutilized land. And this is mostly the land that is allocated to the large-scale investments. Sometimes these are forests where indigenous peoples reside, and they are converted into sugar plantations, sugarcane plantations, tea plantations, or sometimes cornfields and other crops. But these crops do not benefit the local community. Most of them are destined for export, because countries have been encouraged to increase their exports to offset the balance of payment and get good rankings in the World Bank reports. So this is one of the driving forces for the policies which promote grabbing of land.
Well, and people like that diversity is key in agriculture. Diversity of people involved in agriculture, and the diversity of crops grown. So, sort of, how do we combat these policies that governments are encouraging for mega farms that are growing monoculture crops like maize or wheat or rice, and really show that local indigenous crop diversity is the answer for solving some of our most pressing environmental and social challenges, whether it's the climate crisis or whether it's lack of jobs for youth. How can we shift these policies?
Of late, Slow Food has adopted a three strategic pillar approach to our work, to our grassroots efforts. One of the pillars, all these pillars or strategic objectives are interrelated. One of the pillars is by preserving and protecting biological and cultural diversity of all the places on the planet. So protecting this biodiversity also means documenting and cataloging the species and also the food cultures, techniques by the communities themselves, and also creating more opportunities, livelihood opportunities like markets, linking to the restaurants, and also for the communities which are preserving biodiversity, creating more livelihood potential of traditional and indigenous crops and animal breeds or insects in the from these communities in the local diets and cuisine, and also in the local food systems. That goes hand in hand with education.
Sure.
So educating the public about the value and the benefit of preserving biodiversity, about eating food from these diverse sources, and also about the social justice component of food when we are trying to address challenges in the food system. A lot of people need to be educated about the dangers of managing a food system that is not controlled and managed by people, and also need to be educated about the benefit of associating with food that is managed by people, but also positive. The production systems bring positive vibe and also life to the planet. But also the grassroots work on biodiversity and also the education work. It also includes educating policymakers
Right.
and influencing their thinking, their decision, and bringing them back to to a responsible way of acting, bringing them back to the responsible thinking. And they need to start thinking about the communities. They need to start thinking about the injustice of land grabbing, the injustice of destruction of territories of indigenous peoples. They need to think about a food system that is inclusive, but we can only do that through education. Most importantly, Slow Food adopted the third strategic pillar, which is on advocacy. Lobbying and advocacy means influencing policies and programs of the private, but also a lot on the public institutions like governments and government institutions, international institutions. We need to influence these policies starting from the grassroots level. For so many years, we are organizing a grassroots network and raising a voice, a common voice of the farmers, fishermen, fisherwomen, youth, indigenous peoples together to talk from the ground and communicate to the policymakers that this is the food system we want. We don't want land grabbing. We want a process, a production system where communities enjoy and access all these resources without being pushed out. We need a system where indigenous people's rights are respected. They are not driven. They should not. Their land should not be classified as underutilized. We need to understand this system of land use as a very important system. So we are working on advocacy at different levels. Like in Uganda, we've been running a strong campaign against land grabbing. This campaign involves organizing community forums and also food parliaments for the communities to meet the policymakers to express their demand for food sovereignty. And food sovereignty means communities need to stay on their land, stay with their seeds, and manage the resources to produce food and feed themselves. The campaign also involves going to the radio and organizing panels and discussions which enlighten the public on this evil of land grabbing. But also the campaign involves dialogues with the government and public institutions, as well as dialogues with the private institutions which have been implicated in the land grabbing scandals. So we need this dialogue between the civil society, the public institutions, as well as the people who are affected by this land grabbing. So we have, Slow Food, we have always created this space of dialogue, but also sometimes we challenge the policies head on and we issue the policy reviews, policy briefs, and also meet and talk to the policymakers about the policies which we don't want and highlight the changes which need to be made. And this work is going on in many countries all over the world.
And it's so important. And one of the things that you mentioned is, it's important to educate policymakers for sure. It's important to educate those private institutions and research institutions. But when you and I first met, one of the things that we discussed is that farmers often in places like Uganda and elsewhere in sub-Saharan Africa have this sense that the foods that they're growing, those traditional indigenous foods, are not as worthy, are not as sort of, coveted as the new foods, the hybrid seeds, the foods that are imported from elsewhere. So it also takes this cultural shift to convince folks that their land, their knowledge is so valuable and so rich, and that there is all of this sort of importance to what they're doing.
Yes, and this is a very big component of the cultural building this confidence in our traditional systems. It's part of the educational component of Slow Food, educating communities, because this education cuts across from children to understand that it's not evil to eat traditional African food,
Right.
because most of us have gone through an education system that is built on colonial supremacy, to bring out the notion that what comes from outside, what was brought from outside Africa, is the best thing to do, is the best thing to use. So we live in the effect of this colonial past. But through food education, looking at food in a 360-degree view helps a lot to change this notion. Educating and also organizing events about food cultures, diversity, cultural heritage, and to celebrate our local cuisines and our local gastronomy has been a very big part of our work. That's why we organize a lot of community events to educate people about the land use, about seeds, about the food diversity we have. It's a very big component of our work in food education. So we look at the value of our cultural food, but also create a space where people can feel proud of the food they have. We have several documents which are talking about this food, and also to regenerate this knowledge and recultivate a culture that is looking at what is the biodiversity around us and how valuable it is among the young people. So it's really important that food education goes across all ages and also all the different groups, not to forget the communities, because many communities have been brainwashed that the seed that comes from abroad is more superior than the seed that you have. That is wrong. That's why we organize these trainings. That's why we started the educational gardens. That is why we started we organized the events to clear this brainwashing.
Absolutely. It's one of my favorite things about Slow Food and Slow Food International is that you can bring the policy aspects, the advocacy aspects, but also the celebration and joy of these traditional foods. And I want to get back to that in a minute. But in the meantime, I'd like to shift gears because so much is going on in the world right now. So much has gone on over the last 2.5, almost 3 years with the COVID-19 pandemic. Now Russia's aggression towards Ukraine with the war. There have been massive supply chain disruptions, and it's really further highlighted the importance of local and regional food systems. And I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about how the Russian war against Ukraine is going to affect, it's already affecting sub-Saharan Africa right now, but how it will affect it, over the next year. And what you think, the opportunities for farmers in sub-Saharan Africa are to sort of counteract these supply chain disruptions.
The fact is that all the crises which are happening right now in the world greatly affect food security in every part of the country, in every part of the world. When we had the pandemic, there was a very big worry how this pandemic is going to affect access to food, the food security situation on the African continent. And it's true, countries which depend so much on imported food that do not grow enough food, and what we call them net importers of food in sub-Saharan Africa, but also in the Mediterranean part of Africa, they suffered a lot. But in communities where, in places where communities depend less on external resources and also on external supply chains of food and also inputs, there was no big shock.
Right.
Like in the community where I live, a community where people are growing food locally, in the cities there was a shock because it was a disruption in the logistics. In the rural areas, in the communities where farmers live, there was much less disruption. But also we saw the growth of many farmers markets in many different areas, because those became the key areas to access food, and where people became less dependent on the imported food which we normally find in the big chain stores. Same thing with the war in Ukraine. In July, there were so many media reports about how this disruption in wheat supply chains is going to affect the countries in Africa. And it's very unfortunate that we have inherited a food system which is based on highly dependent on the global food supply chains. That a small disruption of the supply chain in one part of the world puts a lot of lives at risk in another part of the world. It is a very unfortunate event, but also it's a very big lesson to many countries, to many governments. And I've seen African governments responding by giving like political statements, how we need to focus, refocus our efforts on local food production. There are so many statements coming from the African governments encouraging local production of food and also shifting the diet from wheat-dependent diet in places where the diet is highly dependent on wheat, and rediscovering our traditional grains.
Right.
So one of the key statements which I remember very well was made by the president of Uganda a few months ago when there was this wheat disruption. He urged the people in the cities who want to eat the white bread on a daily basis. He clearly said we have a problem with the wheat, the importation of wheat in the country, and there is a shortage of wheat. But I advise that if you cannot find bread because of the shortage of wheat, please diversify your diet and start eating cassava and other many local foods which we have. This is a very big political statement.
Sure.
It shows that we cannot rely anymore on these global supply chains. We need to start rediscovering our diversity, our biodiversity. But also we need to encourage the communities to grow food from within the societies. We don't need to put up policies which push communities off the land. So the governments need to learn a very big lesson. But also this encourages the communities, because now we realize that local food supply chains are more important in building food security on this planet than the less dependable global supply chains. So this is what the war has taught us in Ukraine. This is what the pandemic has taught us, because now the food security situation is cutting across from the poor countries, even in the rich countries. The economic food security, the economic scarcity of food, the prices of food have gone up. Also, the food that is dependent on fossil fuel
Right.
is not accessible anymore. But the food that is less dependent on external inputs like fuel, like fertilizers, like agrochemicals, is still accessible. And these communities have less and less disruptions. That's why we are saying we need a regenerative approach to agriculture. We need to regenerate our production systems to be less dependent on fossil fuels, less dependent on large-scale land acquisitions, and less dependent on the international or global supply chains, which have already proved to be less dependable.
Absolutely. One of the things that I had hoped personally that would come out of the pandemic is more respect for farmers all over the globe, more respect for the work, the arduous work that they do every day to keep us fed. And of food and farm workers, everyone in markets and grocery stores and whatnot. But I think, especially here in the United States, we have a short memory. And, I think we've sort of lost that respect that we might have had early on in the pandemic. Now with the looking for a silver lining to come out of this war against Ukraine, I'm hoping that people will understand that local and regional food systems like those that you just described are the answer, are the solution. How can we keep that momentum going? How can Slow Food International and other organizations support that momentum? How do we keep farmers at the forefront?
One thing which we have gone wrong globally as humans, especially people who are working in this area of food security, most of the discussions on food and food security have always missed the voice of the communities. There are a lot of people who sit on the round tables to discuss the future of food for on this planet. But sometimes the voice of the local communities, the voice of the local farmers, and also the issues that they are struggling with every day, they are always missing on the table. What Slow Food is doing, and we started it long time ago, is to build a grassroots movement of communities, a grassroots movement of a grassroots network of producers talking to the consumers, talking to the technical people, building coalitions within the movement, and building this strong connection of all the people who are working along the entire value chain of food, right from the land where food is produced to the restaurant or to the plate where food can be consumed from. So we are working across this entire spectrum. And this is very important to keep the momentum of the producers going, because small producers have always felt less appreciated. I'm a small farmer and I've lived on the small farm all my life. And you can feel, you can feel that when you go out, the policies which are out there, they don't respect your contribution to the society. But when you come to events, to the networks, and you meet other farmers and you meet consumers who really appreciate this kind of work, you feel encouraged. So what we are doing right now is to put the voice of the smallholder farmers together through building communities. Farmers coming together to have a unified voice, to build also more and advocate for more farmers markets which bring out this diversity,
Sure.
but also to challenge the policies which do not recognize the work of smallholder farmers, to change the land laws and policies which criminalize smallholder agriculture, and also to challenge the laws which criminalize farmers' seed systems. In this case, farmers will feel, and also they already start to feel that there is light at the end of the tunnel. So this is not a very simple job to
No.
do, but it needs each and everyone's contribution. It needs each and everyone's action. The consumers need to get more aware of where their food comes from. The definition of food security does not actually talk about where food comes from. This is wrong.
Right.
This must be revised to talk about where actually that food comes from. That is why the people who produce food have always not been respected. If we include the definition of the source of, if we include the source of our food in the definition of food security, those who produce food, those who put food on our plate, will be respected, and they will keep the momentum of feeding us. But also, it's now clear that after the pandemic, in many places, people are now looking down to the local farmers, because also the pandemic helped us to create this relationship. Because of the confinement, many people could not travel to long distances to get food, and you always looked around to the farmer next to you who has this. We need to keep this memory as consumers, and we need to keep this relationship with the producers. We need to keep the relationship with the planet. That is how we can keep the momentum going and building this network of farmers.
I love that new definition of food security that you mentioned, and really including where food comes from. That needs to be part of it. You also mentioned this, in the past and currently we criminalize small scale agricultural producers. And there's a lot of violence sort of inherent in industrial agriculture systems. And you and Slow Food recently published a statement emphasizing the role of civil society actors and how they must play in supporting peace efforts. And I'm wondering how you hope to see organizations take a stand against violence and to help rebuild local food communities. How is that done? I mean, I think one, it's acknowledging that criminalization that you mentioned before, acknowledging the violence and the trauma and the inherent racism that has been a part of our food systems for so long. but that's really hard for eaters to wrap their heads around. And how do we make it not just easier? I don't think it should be easy for them to understand. I think they need to take a lot of time to understand these issues. But how do we tell this story in a better way?
Uh, in in uh, in the work that we do, we try to desist from defining food as a fuel that runs our bodies, that we put in our bodies to keep moving. Definition of nourishment in relation to calories. I think these are key things to look at. If we need to uh, um, address a lot of justice-related issues in the food system. When we think about food, we need to think about food in terms of nature, our relationship with the planet. We cannot run away from taking care of the planet if we want to feed ourselves. We need to take care of the planet. So we have to define food in relation to the environment. We need to define food as a cultural aspect, as a component of cultural identity. So if we only look at food as a fuel, we lose connection, the connection between us and the environment where food is produced. And that once you lose connection with humanity, once you lose connection with the ecosystem where your food comes from, the acts of violence, you also lose the compassion, the empathy.
Right.
And once there is no empathy, there is a lot of violence. Once
Right.
there is no compassion, there is a lot of violence. So there is a very big connection between the disconnection or the disconnect as humans we've put up between where our food comes from and how the environment is useful and how communities and different social groups are affected by the food we eat. And this disconnect is leading to more violent actions in the food systems. Even companies which go to Africa and grab the land and destroy the communities and produce soy and put it on the market, or produce oil palm and put it on the market, because there is a disconnection between us and where our food comes from. We cannot know what this company did. But if we become concerned about these issues, and this concern comes mainly through education. But we need to open our minds to be educated about these issues. We need to open up to these realities in the food system. There is a lot of injustice. There is a lot of violence in the food system. Internal conflicts out because of resources. Look at Mali. In northern part of Mali, the wars, the conflicts are because of access to land. Communities are being driven out of their land, and there are investments which want to use this land to produce cotton, to produce other agricultural crops. If we pay a deaf ear to all these issues of land grabbing, of loss of biodiversity because of the destruction of the local genetic materials, and all these other injustices, like how workers are treated on the big farms, how animals are treated in the industrial livestock systems, we create more and more acts of violence in the food system. So we have to open our minds to food and the topic of justice. We need to open up our minds to food and the environment. We cannot disconnect ourselves anymore from the relationship we have with the planet in regards to food production and consumption, and we expect to feed, to nourish ourselves. So we have to redefine and also to rediscover this connection. That's how we can solve the challenge of violence and also a lot of injustices that exist in the food system today.
There are things that can no longer be ignored, and we can look at it as an opportunity to learn more about our histories and that inherent racism that has been part of our food systems for so long. But it's also this huge opportunity to change, to protect our environment, to protect, you know, the rights of farmers and women and youth and transgender folks. It's this huge opportunity to really change our food system in a real and positive way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
go ahead.
because also the industrial, highly industrial system survives on the ignorance of the consumers on these topics.
Sure.
People who all of us eat, but if we eat with ignorance, I'm sorry to say, we give more power to the violent production system.
Right.
If we do not pay attention to these issues, the system has been designed to disconnect people from the realities of the food system, so that the few investors in the food system can make more and more money and ride on the ignorance of people to create more power and to create more money. We should break this chain of ignorance about where our food comes from, who produces this food, and how it actually affects lives of people elsewhere. Someone may be interested in eating soy as as a vegetable, but this soy is grown in the northern part of, for example, Uganda, where farmers are being driven out of their land. So if you don't understand the whole journey, it becomes really difficult to dig out the violence and the injustice in the food system. So we have to break that chain, and we have to allow to be educated on the all the meanings of food. It's not just the calories. It's not just the product you see on the plate. Coffee is not just the coffee you see in your cup. It's the culture, it's the nature, it's the environment, and also livelihoods of many people who put that product on the market.
Absolutely. And we do have to break this culture of ignorance. And one of the terms that I have learned over the last several years is becoming a citizen eater, someone who is very engaged with how their food is grown, where it is, where it comes from, how, you know, how their politicians think about it, that they vote on, you know, how they want the food system to look. So being a citizen eater, I think, is so much of a part of this. In the few minutes we have left, Eddie, I want to talk about, you know, something really positive. You're at Terra Madre, which is one of the most incredible events in the entire world. And you get to meet so many wonderful producers and activists and advocates and researchers and others who really, really care about food. And so I'm wondering what you've seen this week, what you've heard, what has inspired you.
It's been a very emotional moment to see people coming together again from all over the world, from all the 150 countries coming together. People who have not had access to internet when there was a lockdown, people who never had access to talk to each other during the lockdown, during when events were banned all over the world. It's so interesting to see them back together again. There is a lot of energy, positive energy in Terra Madre. There is a lot of learning going on in Terra Madre. There is a lot of regeneration of our urge and desire to go and take an urgent action against all the crises which are happening in the world. You could feel it, you can feel it, you could, since the first day of the event, you could see people talking to each other. Even if we speak so many different languages from all over the world, but Terra Madre reminds us that there is that one important language out of all those many languages, and that is food. So people are so connected with food, and we chose the theme of regeneration because it's at this moment that we need to regenerate the food system. We need to take an urgent action to break the dominance, to break the criminal system, the violent system, and build a new system that respects all this diversity of people who are here in Terra Madre today. So it's a very inspiring event. It's also inspired me a lot, because I also joined this movement through Terra Madre, through coming to Terra Madre as a delegate. And I'm really happy that after 14 years, I'm presiding over my first Terra Madre as a slow food president. And I'm happy to see people out here sharing inspiration, sharing ideas, learning from each other, and also sharing the urgency to change the food system. So this is what we need to continue doing. It's good to meet online, but also it's very interesting to meet physically and share the knowledge, and also talk to each other. So Terra Madre is a very big learning opportunity. It's a network. Even after Turin, after the 5 days of the event, the network, the Terra Madre network, will go out in the world and they will take actions to regenerate the food system. And for me, that inspires me a lot. It inspires me a lot also to see so many young people this time in Terra Madre. It means young people are becoming more and more aware about our urgent responsibility to take on these challenges which are affecting us. So it's a great event. It's a great feeling. It's a wonderful time we are having, and we hope to have this event without any more other problems in the future.
I'm knocking on wood for you for that, but I am so glad to have been able to talk to you today. I know it's been an exhausting week for you, but also an inspiring one. I want to reiterate what you said about urgency. The urgency to solve these problems is so, it's on the top of everybody's mind as we head into COP27, the United Nations Climate Change Conference. We have to keep moving these issues forward. We have to keep youth and farmers at the forefront. Eddie, thank you for what you do. As I said before, it has been one of the greatest honors of my career to know you, and I am so happy for you and all of the work of Slow Food International.
Thank you so much, and also thank you so much for the work you do, and also the stories, the research you do brings out the real actions that are out there that have the potential to regenerate the planet, and that is the action we are looking for. All those small activities put together have a very big potential in changing a lot of things around us. So thank you so much. It's been for me, I've always learned a lot also from you, and also from your networking potential. So I hope I will still learn a lot from you, and I hope we still talk to each other more and more frequently. And thanks to this technology, that we can always meet and inspire each other and talk about many things. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You are an inspiration, and thank you to everyone who organized today's events and all of Terra Madre. Be well, my friend.
Thank you. Stay well.